An official welcome to this webinar, Lunch and Learn. I hope you brought a good lunch about ISO 9001-2015. I'm Erin Reade, and I'm the Marketing Manager for Polaris MEP. We're very excited to present this program to you today because it's really part of what Polaris MEP does as a resource for Rhode Island manufacturers. For those of us those on the phone who we haven't had the privilege of working with yet, Polaris MEP is mission driven. Our entire charter is to help small and medium-sized manufacturers in the state of Rhode Island grow and increase their profitability and become stronger and more resilient. We are part of a national network of 51 MEPs, that stands for Manufacturing Extension Partnerships, across the nation. We're also a business unit of the University of Rhode Island Research Foundation. And what that means for Rhode Island's manufacturers is that we can draw on national connections to help the folks in our own state. We are a consulting group, but we are also measured completely by the impact that we have on our clients. So in order for us to be successful, the work that we do must be successful in the results it generates for clients. And those measurable impacts are usually increased sales, reduced expenses, jobs retained or created. One of the ways that people can have those positive results is through ISO certifications. And so today, Chris Cinieri is going to be walking us through how this structure can improve consumer confidence, how it can improve customer satisfaction, how it could expand your market opportunities. Chris is a Six Sigma Black Belt from the American Society for Quality. At Polaris MEP, he is our project manager who leads our quality management systems, implementations, and certification efforts. And he's also the current head of the Rhode Island chapter of the American Society of Quality. So I know that he can bring insights from both kind of sides of the equation as we're talking about what ISO can do for you. With that, I'll let Chris take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Erin. And thank you everyone for being with us today, especially in light of the wonderful weather that we're having. It's nice to have you here. So if you're here with us today, there's a good chance that you have heard of ISO 9001, and maybe you have no familiarity with it. Maybe you have a basic familiarity with it, but you might have some questions in terms of what is ISO 9001 and why would I want to get it? What would I have to do to get it? Not unimportantly, how much might this cost me? So we're going to talk about all of those things in today's agenda, and hopefully you'll come away today with a better understanding to make a decision of whether ISO is right for you. We're also excited today to be joined from a local manufacturer. So Amanda Reade Sturgeon is on the line with us and is going to speak at the end about Reade Advanced Materials' journey from deciding to become ISO registered, the challenges that they faced going through it, and ultimately the benefits that they've seen from doing it. So it's nice to be able to offer that real world insight and not just take all of my word for it. And of course, at the very end, we'll open it up to any questions that you might have. Okay, ISO 9001-2015. What is it? Well, first, let's start with what it isn't. So I want to talk about a couple of myths that are around when people talk about ISO registration. One of them is, I have to be a manufacturer to become certified. And that's false. Really, anybody can become certified to ISO 9001, whether you're a manufacturer, a distributor, a broker. I've seen some colleges and universities become certified. It's very flexible to meet your business needs. So in that sense, anybody can become certified. And also, don't let size fool you. We've worked with companies that are as small as 3 people total, all the way up to several hundred. So another myth that people talk about is, I'm going to have to create a large amount of documentation. Who on my staff is going to be able to manage all of this documentation? We don't have the time to do this. Well, that's also false. So it's true you're going to have to manage some documentation. But the standard says that documentation and those needs are based upon 3 things: the size of your company, the complexity of your processes, and the competence of your people. So if you have a small machine shop that hires skilled labor, and you run a relatively straightforward process, you may not need a lot of paperwork, a lot of documentation. If you're a 3-shift round-the-clock manufacturer with several hundred employees, 2 sites, well, you might need a little bit more documentation to manage all of that. But there's no hard and true amount that you need to have in terms of documentation. Okay, another myth. ISO registration will cost me tens of thousands of dollars. There's no way my facility can afford to pay for this. And that's also false. So certification costs are based upon the number of employees in an organization, okay? And while we are not a registrar ourselves, I do have a slide at the end where we can talk a little bit about some cost expectations to help you to budget and to think forward about that, to give you a sense. And the last myth that I wanted to tackle up front, if I become certified, I can only buy from other ISO certified suppliers. And that's also false. So you can continue to purchase from your current suppliers. You can continue to add suppliers that meet your needs. There's just a little bit of due diligence that you have to do now. In other words, it won't be as simple as picking up the phone and saying, please send me 10 of these today. There's a little bit of due diligence that you'll have to do, but it's not much. So hopefully that clears up some of the more popular myths that we hear out in the field. Okay, so now, what is ISO 9001? Well, at its simplest, it's a document. It's a 40-page document, to be honest. You go and you download it from the American National Standards website. It's about $159. It's a PDF. But what it represents is what's called a quality management system. And it is focused around product and making sure your product and service meets your customers' needs and any regulatory needs. It also aims to enhance customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is at the forefront of what you'll be measuring if you become certified. And it can establish processes that result in continual improvement. So there's actually a strong relationship with some continual improvement methodologies, such as lean manufacturing. ISO 9001 takes what they call a risk-based thinking structure. So it ties everything back to risk. What is the risk? What are the risks inherent in my business? And what can I do to mitigate them so that I'm providing my customers with what they want when they want it? So we have to make sure that each risk is considered throughout the processes. We'll look at preventive actions as part of our strategic planning. So if we identify a risk, what can we do to help mitigate that risk? And we identify opportunities to help us continually improve. Why go through this? What are the results of doing this? Well, the aim is to improve customer confidence and satisfaction. It helps us to assure consistency of quality of goods and services. And it establishes a proactive culture of prevention and improvement. It gets everybody on the floor thinking in terms of what is my role, how does it impact quality, and what can we do better together? ISO 9001 is a document that is broken up into 10 sections. Now, to be honest with you, the first 3 sections are definitions and scope and things you need to know, but nothing you necessarily have to do to comply with. Sections 4 through 10, that's where we have to put some plans in place. And if anybody is familiar with Plan, Do, Check, Act as a continual improvement methodology, the way the standard is set up in the latest revision, and by the way, the 2015 in the title is the year of the latest revision. And the way it was set up was to follow the Plan, Do, Check, Act process. So 4 sections are related to planning our quality management system. Section 8, operation, is how are we going to do it? How are we going to actually make that product or provide that service? Section 9 is performance evaluation. That's where we check our efforts. And section 10, continual improvement, that is where we act upon what we have found out. That's where we make those small improvements every day to keep on track with customer satisfaction. Okay, so we've heard about it. Maybe customers have called and asked us about it. Maybe we've read about it. Why would you want to do this? Well, it can expand market opportunities. It can allow you to sell more to an existing customer. It may allow you to find new customers. It may allow you to get into new markets. It differentiates you from competitors. Take a look at the landscape that your business operates in. And that's one thing that you'll have to do as part of ISO is identify that landscape. How many other folks have ISO certification? And if a potential client enters that landscape, are they likely to move towards that person? So it'll help you differentiate yourself, and it sharpens your business processes. So all of the work that goes into creating a quality management system and putting these processes in place, yes, it does seem like maybe it's a little extra work today, but the idea behind it, and if you go into it with this mindset, that it'll help you sharpen your business processes and become a better version of yourself, that's where you reap the benefits. So again, continuous improvement, increased efficiencies, effective resource management. We're going to talk about resource management here in a bit. Increased profit and market share through those increased efficiencies and such. And providing consistent and reliable solutions. A lot of folks who are ISO certified, one of the benefits that they mention is repeat business. Those customers know, after doing business with them for so long, they can count on the right part in the right quantity, at the right quality, at the right time. Okay, so now we have a good understanding of what it is, why we'd like to pursue it. What's that next step? What does it take to comply with ISO 9001? So the short answer is it takes everybody in the organization, okay? It's driven from the top. Top management owns it, but it's supported by everybody in the organization. So it's up to everybody to follow processes consistently. And if we don't have standardized processes today, those are some of the things that we would work on to help get there. It helps support the direction of the business, and everybody's direction is to want to grow. It ensures the availability of appropriate resources, and resources could be facilities, equipment, personnel, etc. And it helps us achieve intended results. So we're looking to have good on-time delivery. We're looking to have good quality numbers. We may want to have a certain throughput for costing purposes. Having a good quality management system helps us to achieve those intended results. Okay, so I had mentioned that the document is 10 sections, and the first 3 are definitions, and you can read them. But starting at section 4 is where we have to really start to work to put together a QMS. And section 4 deals with the context of the organization. And sometimes people get tripped up by this. Sometimes people think this is extraneous information. Why do we have to put this down? We know this stuff. And the good news is you probably do already know this stuff. So it's not a whole lot that you have to go and gather. But they'd like you to document it because they want to realize that you understand the landscape in which you do business. So some of the things that we'll talk about in context of the organization. You have to have a risk plan. Again, take everything back to risk-based thinking. One way of doing a risk plan is through something called SWOT analysis, or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, as you can see here. That's one way of putting together a risk plan. But ISO wants to know that you as an organization have identified those risks inherent in your business that could potentially harm you from providing customers with what they want, when they want it, how they'd like it, and where they'd like it. ISO would also like you to identify what they call interested parties and what are their requirements. So on the screen, you see an example of an interested parties table. By and large, your interested parties will be the owners of the company. And what are they looking for? They're looking to expand the business. They're looking for growth, profitability, etc. Your employees have an interest in your business. Okay, they'd like steady employment, safe work environment, etc. Your customers, your suppliers, any potential government regulators, and even your community that you operate in are all interested in your existence in some way or another. And we need to identify that. And then another thing that ISO would like you to identify are what are the processes that fall within your four walls and also outside of your four walls, right? Because some of us outsource a lot of processes. Can you show the interaction between those processes? And can you show where opportunities may lie in those interactions? So typically what we'll do here is just what you see on the screen, a basic flow chart. And you may already have this, but it's just a way of identifying what is it that we do and what interacts with what. Okay, so the next section, section 5, deals with leadership. Leadership and commitment. This is the top management commitment, okay? So it's not, I wish this would happen. It's not, I want this to happen. It's not only, I will make this happen. It's, I will make this happen no matter what. So having that vision and providing the resources to make it happen, all in the name of customer satisfaction. You'll also have to set up a quality policy. This is a very important part of ISO. It's one of the few required documents. And your quality policy can say anything you'd like, really. It's very close to a mission statement or a vision statement if you already have one of those. However, ISO 9001 says that somewhere in your policy, you have to make mention of two specific things. You have to make mention specifically that you will comply with customer requirements and you will continually improve your quality management system. So as long as those two are present, your quality policy is free to say whatever you'd like. You have to identify roles, responsibilities, and authorities in relation to the quality management system. So for instance, you may have an organizational chart that outlines the president, the vice presidents, department managers, supervisors, okay, and perhaps their various tasks and responsibilities. The difference here is we're outlining those same roles, but more specifically, what are they doing in response to our quality management system? So if I'm a machine operator, my job might be to operate a lathe, and I'm turning all sorts of dimensions, but I'm also responsible for the quality of that part. And that's what's outlined here. Okay, section 6 deals with planning. So how do we go about planning a quality management system, and what are we required to have? Well, we already talked about risks. So we know we have to have a risk assessment. And that risk assessment could take the form of SWOT analysis, which we looked at. But there are also other ways. One is called failure mode and effects analysis. Maybe some of you have used to doing FMEAs. It could be a risk register, which is another formal process. It could be a brainstorming session where you take notes. Really, it could be any form of documentation that shows top management came together and decided, here's our risks inherent to our business that we have to address in some manner. You also have to have quality objectives. Now, what you see on the screen are examples of quality objectives. It could be 100% on-time delivery and 100% quality, meaning everything is free of defects or it's made exactly as the customer would like it. But I've seen companies that have a dozen or more of these. They get very specific. It's up to you. Once you've chosen them, you have to track them. And you have to think in terms of those risks you identified, how do those risks impact, if at all, these quality objectives. So for instance, if we identify a risk of a lack of qualified personnel, at present, we're short-staffed. That could potentially impact our on-time delivery. Could also potentially impact our quality. So that's how the relationship between the risk plan and your quality objectives works. Okay. So once you've identified that, you've got to have a plan on how you're going to achieve those quality objectives, which means taking those risks you've identified and putting an action plan behind them. If not to fix them, to address them, right? Because sometimes it may involve a purchase that has to go in CapEx, right? We can't buy that equipment this year. It's got to go into a 1 to 3 year plan. But here's what we're going to do in the meantime to mitigate it. We're going to add extra inspection. We're going to do this or that. As long as you have a plan that shows you identify the risk, you understand it, and you've got a plan to improve it. That's what ISO is looking for. Section 7 deals with support, and there's a lot of different support issues here. So let's talk about them. Resources. So we talked a little bit about resources earlier. Resources can be equipment, okay? You can see the difference here between the piece of equipment on the left and the one on the right. And it doesn't mean that you have to go out and sand, prime, and paint all of your equipment. It's asking you to take a look at the status of your equipment. Is it being properly maintained? There are manufacturers who are operating equipment from the turn of the 20th century, and it still works because it's properly maintained. So taking a look at your facility, your building, your equipment, what is your plan to maintain those equipment? That's what resources is talking about. Okay. What you see here is a calibration log. So maybe you're in a shop that has to take measurements as part of your production. It could be micrometers, it could be calipers, it could be temperature or pH. You have to show that you're using the right tool for the right measurement, okay? So if we have any machinists on the call, you're not gonna use a tape measure to measure half a thou. It's not the right tool for the right job. So we identify what are the tools in our shop, what's their condition, what's their current calibration status. Okay, that's all part of resources. Another resource that not everybody thinks about is related to organizational knowledge. Oftentimes this goes by tribal knowledge. And again, just using machine shops as an example. There's a lot of times where there are folks who have been employed there 25, 30, 35 years. And the stuff they know, it's worth money, right? And as they approach retirement, it becomes a conundrum. We're hiring new folks, but they just don't have that experience. And some of those things that people have picked up over the years, that's stuff that you just don't get taught in school. So the idea behind capturing organizational knowledge is saying, what are the things that are needed to run this business? What do we have to know? Where is it located? And it could be in Billy's head or in Jane's head, in which case we've got to capture it. But the idea is when retirement comes or other attrition, are you prepared to keep moving forward, taking care of your customers at the same level of quality that they expect? That's why they ask you to gather organizational knowledge. Competence. We have to show and demonstrate the competence of our people to do the job that they're doing. And probably the simplest and the most common way of doing this is a training matrix, such as the one seen on the screen. Some of you may have something like this and it may look differently, and that's fine. But an auditor will ask, when you're hiring, what are some of the things that you're looking for? Experience, education. Do you provide training on some of those areas, or do you expect people to come in with it? If you expect people to come in with it, do you test them in some way? How are you sure that those folks are capable of doing that job? Now you'll see here the word grandfathered listed. And a typical conundrum with folks is, well, the folks I have, we've trained them, we just don't really have any documentation to show it. And that's fine. When you start moving down the path seeking ISO certification, there are a few areas, employee training being one, where we draw a line in the sand and we say, okay, we're going to choose a date. And as of that date, anyone hired before that date is going to be grandfathered. And we're going to say that based on their historical performance, they can perform that job. And now anybody that we hire after that date, we're going to have to provide documented training records, which is basically a sign-in sheet that shows who trained them, when, and they signed off acknowledging that they were trained. Communication. Communication is a big role within a QMS. A master communication plan that you see here takes a lot of the elements of the standard that talk about what communications need to take place and breaks it down to when does that communication have to happen? Who does it have to be communicated to? From whom will it come? And when do we have to do that? What triggers us to make that communication happen? And if this looks overwhelming, it's certainly something that we can have a conversation with and talk about. But really, communication is communication with your employees, with your customers, with your vendors. Again, probably all things that you're doing currently. We're just capturing it in a more formal way. Documentation, okay, documentation is a big one. And ISO doesn't do us any favors when it says you will have maintained and retained documents, okay? Maintained documents are documents to direct execution, and retained are documents to prove execution. So what does that mean? A policy or a procedure or something that you're going to reference is a maintained document. I'll reference it, but I'm not really going to do anything to it. Conversely, if I print a form that I'm going to fill out on the floor, or a log, or something that I'm going to use to capture some information, that's a retained document. I'm going to file that away, or I'm going to scan it. And that's going to prove that I performed that quality check, or that's going to prove that I performed that production step. That's a retained document. So hopefully that clears a little bit about the difference between the two. You don't have to do this, but it's helpful to put together a master list of documents related to your quality management system. So anything that's required by the standard, anything that shows the interaction of your processes, how you do what you do, how you check quality, belongs in a master list of documents. Certain areas, accounting and finance being one, those are outside of the purview of ISO. And you're more than welcome to capture that information in something like a master list of documents, but it's not necessary. Okay, the biggest section of ISO 9001 deals with operations. And I'll say this, we'll touch upon each of these a little bit, but going back to the initial myth of I have to be a manufacturer, and we said false. One of the things that you can do if you seek ISO certification is you can exclude some clauses from your scope with justification, okay? And we'll talk about an example with design. But if you're not a manufacturer, there are certain things in here that will not apply to you. So let's go through and see if that makes sense. Okay. 8.1 is simply an overview of how do we operate. 8.2 talks about determining product and service requirements. And basically what it means is having a conversation with the customer to understand what is it they would like and coming to the realization of, can we do it for them? And ISO 9001 says, if you cannot perform the work, if you cannot do that job, if it's not within your purview today, you cannot accept that PO. Yet. Now you may work towards figuring out how you can do that, But if somebody sent you a request for quote and it's not within your capability, you have to reply with a no quote. And 8.2 just sets up that communication so that understanding is there. 8.3 talks about design and development. Does your company do R&D? If it does, you have to document it somehow. Okay? In other words, the back of the napkin will no longer do. But again, if you don't design anything, don't worry. Design can be excluded from your scope with justification. The litmus test here. Do you have any drawings with your company's name on them? And I realize that's geared more towards a machine shop environment or a textile environment. But if you have drawings with your name on it, you have to comply with design and development. If you only work with customer prints, even if you consult the customer on that print, as long as the customer's name is on the print, you can say, I don't perform design and development. Okay. And again, it just goes through a set of inputs and outputs. You have to talk about feasibility. You have to talk about cost. You have to talk about the viability of doing it, et cetera, to show that you comply with design and development. 8.4 deals with the control of externally provided products, purchasing, okay? How do we select vendors? And it's not just materials that we buy, it's outsourced processes. So if I have to send something out to do something I don't do, maybe it has to be heat treated, maybe it has to be painted, maybe grinding has to take place. I have to control that vendor, same as a vendor I would buy raw material from. So there are all different ways you can do it. We talked earlier about due diligence. That due diligence could be a survey that you send to a new supplier, asking them some questions. How do you control quality? You'll create an approved supplier list. This is something else you have to have, which basically after a supplier meets your needs, you can put them onto your approved supplier list. And as always, there has to be communication. So a customer sends you something, you need to translate that need to the vendor to make sure that they supply you with the right material or process. Section 8.5, also a big section. Okay, now we've got the order, we've got the material. What do? How do we take those parts and turn them into an OEM product? How do we take that material and turn it into a finished part? That falls under 8.5. What you see on the screen is an example of a work order traveler. Some people have a job order. Some people call it a work order. Okay. It's just how do you control that production once it goes into production? Section 8.6 talks about the release of products. At some point, you've got to have an inspection that takes place that says, yes, this meets the customer's needs, and we're going to go ahead and ship it. 8.7 talks about non-conforming output. Some of you may be familiar with a non-conformance report. If we have product that doesn't meet specification, something happened to it, it was put together incorrectly, we have to identify it. We have to make sure that we get our arms around it, make sure it doesn't get to the customer. If it has got to the customer, we have to make sure that we disposition it. So that's an important process we have to put together. Section 9 deals with performance measurements. So again, plan, do, check, act. Now we're going to check. So what are some of the metrics that we put in place? And you're free to put together whatever metrics make sense for your business. Okay? Could be on-time delivery, quality, customer satisfaction, any process metrics, throughput, percent first pass, whatever. That's going to give us feedback into our quality management system. You will have to do an internal audit. Okay, this could be an individual, it could be a team. You can have it done internally by your own folks, or you can have an outside company come in and do it. Okay, we do many of these. You have to do it annually, and it's very similar to the full external audit that you will get to become certified. It's a way for you to do a deep dive into your system and find those areas to improve, hopefully before an external auditor comes in. You'll have to have a management review meeting. Okay. at least annually. We would recommend twice a year. And there are all different prescribed topics by the standard that you have to speak about in your management review meeting. And it's really talking about the effectiveness of the program. How are our vendors doing? How's our equipment performing? How are our employees doing, et cetera. Section 10, so plan, do, check, act. Now we're at the act. Continual improvement. Big part of section 10 is corrective actions. Maybe you're familiar with corrective actions, okay? Something went wrong. Something happened that we didn't expect to happen. It may be a candidate to do a corrective action. And the corrective action looks at what happened. Why did it happen? What were the circumstances that caused it to happen? You perform what's called root cause analysis. Probably some of you are familiar with that. With the idea being that we're going to find out what happened and we're going to put a corrective action in place to hopefully prevent it from happening again. And this is just an example. This, that, and the other thing happened. Well, who's going to look into it? Okay, what are the resources that we'll need to investigate it? We'll assign a due date based upon the risk. How bad was it? And what's our success measure? How do we know that we've put a good corrective action in place? Okay. So that's touching upon the standard in a really quick manner. So let's talk about, if we decide to move forward, what's the timeline? What are some of the anticipated costs? If you decide today that you would like to become ISO certified, plan to spend somewhere up to 6 months putting together your quality management system. And that's a mix of procedures, documents, okay? And again, it depends on the size of your company, complexity of your process, the competence of your people. Starting around the 6-month mark, perform your internal audit. Could be someone on your company's end, could be an external auditor, and have a management review meeting. Somewhere around 9 months, you're going to continue to generate objective evidence. You're going to have a stage 1 and a stage 2 registration audit. And there are some rough costs listed, about $1,500 to $3,000, again, depending on number of employees. After you have your stage 1 and stage 2 and you successfully pass, congratulations, you're ISO 9001 certified. Okay. Every year, internal audit management review. Year 2 and year 3 are what's called surveillance audits. It's roughly half the standard 1 year and the other half the next year. Not entirely, but roughly. And on the 4th year, it's what's called your re-registration or your recertification audit. So it's a 3-year process. Certification, 2 surveillance audits, recertification. Okay, so now we are pleased today to have a special guest with us. And after listening to me, and hopefully I've added some light on some of these topics, but it would be a great benefit, we feel, to have somebody actually talk about what their experience was and some of the things that they went through. So now what I would like to do is introduce to you Amanda Reade Sturgeon from Reade Advanced Materials. They are an industry leader, and she'll talk about their business. They're ISO 9001 certified, and we look forward to hearing about their story. So Amanda, if we could open up your mic and share your story with us.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Amanda. I work for Reade Advanced Materials. We are a non-stocking distributor of things like this beautiful aluminum flake you see on your screen. We're based in East Providence. This will be I think it's our 4th year being ISO certified. We're up for our recertification audit next week. I'm a little nervous, but so far our experience with ISO and Polaris has been great. I can't say anything bad about it, really. We had to become ISO certified because one of our larger customers, General Dynamics, required us to, in terms of if we wanted to continue doing business with GD, we would have to get our ISO certification. And they are such a big part of our business that we couldn't really say no. So I don't know actually why we were connected with Polaris. I'm guessing it was through the Commerce Corp. Someone that probably mentioned that, you know, it's not as daunting as it seems. Work with Polaris, they'll be really helpful. And I'd say helpful is an understatement. We started off working with Jeff Stevens, who has since retired. But one thing Chris didn't mention earlier was that at the beginning, when you're putting together your QMS and all of those documents, that was something that Polaris did. So once a week, I mean, it took months of 3 hours, 6 hours, once a week. Jeff would come into our office and we would just go through everything line by line, and he would help us. He helped us build our QMS. And if that was something we had to do ourselves, it would have been overwhelming and daunting. It doesn't even describe, it would have been a mess. So having the expertise of Polaris there to do it for us, and not do it for us, but help us, was instrumental. We received a grant through maybe through Real Jobs RI, as it was training. So we got a grant to cover half the cost. And there's also every year when we do our internal audit again, we apply for another grant which covers half the cost, which is really helpful. I'd say from the switching to ISO certified, definitely, as great as it's been, it definitely has come with its struggles. As a distributor, we don't design anything, we don't calibrate, we don't ship anything ourselves. It's really all order processing, taking orders and sending them along. But everyone in our company, everyone does the same thing. They just all did things their own way. And so it's trying to standardize everything was very hard, especially when there's people that have been doing their job the same way for years and years. For them to switch some of their processes was a little tricky. We also didn't have a way to document, like when there was a problem with the order, we would handle that problem and make sure things were done correctly, but we weren't documenting it and finding a way to keep track of all. So I'd say having the documentation has been pretty great. It also, what has benefited us as a small family business, it's forced us to sit together more frequently and to look at the ways we can improve. Twice a year, we get together well, it used to be in the conference room and now it's virtually. But we sit and we go through everything with our company and talking about where we're having problems, are we having any issues with our vendors that we need to maybe reconsider? How's the delivery? Let's go over all of the complaints we've had. Let's review our SWOT analysis. I mean, I don't even think our company had a SWOT analysis really beforehand. And now this is something that we are continually looking at and updating and thinking about actions we can take based on that. So it's been pretty great. So I'd say if within your company, if you have the time and the ability to do it based on whatever your company does, whether you're a manufacturer or an office or however ISO standard can fit with your company, I'd say it's pretty helpful at just helping you improve and continually find ways to do things better and make your customers happy.
Well, thank you so much for that insight. I think it's, very helpful to hear from an actual company who's actually gone through it. And, what are the struggles as well as what are the benefits? So really, thank you very much for that insight. And I hope that the folks on the call today benefit from that as well. And just to touch on something Amanda said, you are not alone in this, okay? So one of two things happened after you watched this call today, okay? Either we have shed some light on this topic for you, or you're more confused than when you started. But in any case, feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. And we're going to move into taking some questions and answers with the last amount of time that we have. But I just want to end with this. If you are seriously considering ISO 9001 for your business, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am more than willing to come on site or meet virtually, however you're comfortable today, for 1 hour to do a gap analysis. And we can just talk about, where does your business sit currently? What are some of the things we would have to do to get there? And hopefully bring you a better understanding. So that is always available. And again, feel free to head over to the website and reach out. And I am more than happy to have that conversation with anybody.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Amanda. This was great. And the number one question, which is kind of a standard one, is will we be sending out a copy of this deck after? Yes, we will, in fact, be sending out a copy of the presentation. So for those of you who couldn't write super quick or wanted to make sure you captured some of the examples that Chris showed, those are coming your way. So we have a few different questions, Chris and Amanda, that we're hoping that you can kind of shed some light on. So the first question is that at one point, Chris, you mentioned 2015 was the date the standards were revised. When is the next revision?
That's a good question. So the standards are reviewed every 5 years. And then a determination is made on when the next update will come. So it was reviewed in 2020, and it was decided that no revision was needed immediately. The scuttlebutt in the industry is 2023 or 2024. So not in the next year or two. I know that.
All right. So then the next question, and I think that this was more for Amanda, and it said, tracking quality objectives. Is there a specific requirement? How did Reade Advanced Materials approach tracking quality objectives?
So our quality objectives, we have two. One is make sure I get it right because my auditor is right there. So earmuffs, Chris, if I don't get it right. 100% on-time delivery and making sure that the order meets a customer's specs. So the way we track those are we do on-time delivery tracking. So it's just every month we come up, it's however you can find a way to track it within your system, whether your CRM can do it. We do ours manually. It's counting up our orders and then looking at the dates that they're shipped. And so you get a monthly metric. It's also tracking within a month, how many orders have problems with it, non-conformances or corrective actions. So that's something that we do manually, just counting up and, plugging it into Excel. That's how we track it.
Thanks, Amanda. I think that goes back to what Chris said at the beginning, which is that it's not requiring massive amounts of documentation or a certain form. It's what works best for your company. It sounds like you guys have found a mix of some manual, some kind of automatic processes.
Yeah, that was, Erin, that was a good point. That was something that our external auditor, Ron, had mentioned at our first audit or second audit. He said something that's always stuck with me, is that ISO is not about your company conforming to the ISO 9001 standards. It's like finding a way for the ISO to fit, finding the best way for it to fit with the way you do business. And that's made it seem a lot more approachable.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I guess this kind of goes with that having to conform to somebody else's requirements. Of course, I think this question is more for you. Do we need to use a specific registrar?
You do not need to use a specific registrar. No, that's a good question. So when you shop around for registrars, and I should probably say a registrar is a certification body. This is the person or the company that you will contract with to come in, audit your system for certification to ISO. It's called a registrar. And you're free to select whomever you would like. They just have to specifically provide ISO 9001 certification, which most of them do because it's ubiquitous. So if you'd like help with that, we can make recommendations, but you're free to select anybody you would like.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So the next question is that how long you had given kind of a table that showed some time frames, but how long does it typically take from start to finish to get an ISO certification?
That's a good question. So typically, if we go in and work together with somebody, we'll say about 9 to 12 months from the day we first meet until you receive your certificate. That said, we have seen folks become certified in a shorter time frame. You have to think about your capacity and how much time people internally can dedicate to this. If you're able to set aside that time, you can move through it much more quickly. But I'd say 9 to 12 months is something good to plan on.
Excellent. I think that, Amanda, you mentioned that during that time you kind of had these regular sessions with Polaris MEP that kept you guys moving on your timetable.
Yeah, and I had a newborn baby also that would come with me. So Jeff was even more patient.
Well, I think that delivering both certification and a baby is pretty 1-2 punch for the ISO registrar. So that's pretty amazing. The next question says, we are entering a hiring phase and there are a lot of people in motion. When is the best time to pursue ISO certification?
There's no time like the present. And I say that because I'm going to guess when the hiring phase is over, something else is going to come up. Okay. Maybe new product development, maybe some, new contracts coming in, adding shifts, etc. There's never an ideal time. In other words, if you wait for a lull, you could wait forever. So don't let the fact that you're hiring a lot of folks now frighten you in terms of the amount of work you would have to do to capture that for ISO. It's a training matrix you would have to put together, and it's not a whole lot of work to maintain. So if that's your one concern, I would say feel free to move forward whenever you feel comfortable, but don't let that hold you back.
Excellent. So I have one last question, and it kind of has two parts, right? One is ISO 9001 the only ISO that I'm supposed to pursue? And the second is, what if a potential customer requests ISO certification, but we don't have it yet? We're on the process of getting certified.
Okay, so let's tackle the first one. 2015 stands for the year of the last revision. 9001 is an arbitrary number, okay? Has no meaning, it was just picked. A lot of people get hung up over that. But there are a lot of other ISO certifications and other certifications outside of ISO. And 9001 is a quality management system and it can apply to anybody. But if you are a machine shop and you do a lot of work for the aerospace industry, you may want to consider something called AS 9100. If you are a company that produces medical devices, you may want to consider ISO 385, sorry. Even I get confused. So there are a lot of these that you can add on, or you could go standalone, but pursue ISO 9001 and then look if there's some other one that makes sense to you. And we can help you identify those. Now for the second question, second part, the one thing you don't want to do is tell people that you are certified when you're in fact not. So if a contract comes in and you're in the process of seeking certification, typically what happens is you tell the folks, we are in process of seeking certification. We expect to have certification in September of this year, October of this year, whatever it may be. I've seen a lot of times where a clause will be written into the contract that says, we'll begin business, provided you become certified by such and such date, and it allows you to start that business. And then you seek your certification during that time frame. That's the best way to go about it.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I think we are coming to the end of this time. I want to thank both of our presenters, Chris and Amanda, for the wonderful insights that they've shared with us about the ISO 9001-2015 journey to certification, because it definitely sounds like it was a journey, whether or not you have a newborn along for the ride. And we're so grateful for the way you approach this. Chris, can you advance one more slide so that if people want to follow up with you, they know how to find you? Your email is there, your phone is there, or you can go to polarismep.org and check out our quality management standards page. And there's lots of ways to reach out that way as well. Thank you guys very much. We look forward to talking to you and hopefully supporting you in your efforts towards ISO certification.